Seat 12F didn't look like much. A narrow cushion pressed between two strangers, tray table stuck, armrest worn smooth by years of restless elbows. She slid into it quietly, hoodie drawn, backpack tucked under the seat. To anyone watching, she was just another tired passenger on a late-night military hop. Nobody glanced twice. That was exactly the point. Her name wasn't on the manifest the way it should have been. Just a civilian-sounding alias, nothing special. The gate agent hadn't raised an eyebrow, and the passengers already seated barely looked up. She kept her head down, hands folded, the picture of anonymity. But anonymity had a way of attracting the wrong kind of attention. The man across the aisle noticed her first. Polished shoes, loosened tie, the kind of passenger who believed economy. Rows were beneath him. He smirked when she struggled with the overhead bin. One arm bent awkwardly under the weight of her small duffel. "Careful," he muttered just loud enough, his voice dripping with mockery. "Those bins aren't made for amateurs." She didn't answer. Just slid the bag in, pressed the latch until it clicked and sat down. Calm, steady. No reaction. The young woman in the seat ahead turned to her companion and whispered, not quietly, "Enough? Looks like she hasn't flown much. Probably her first time on a military contract flight." They both laughed softly. She adjusted her seatbelt, thumb brushing the buckle, eyes steady on the floor. The cabin lights dimmed to boarding mode. Soft amber glow across the rows, the kind that made every cough echo, every whisper seem sharper. The air smelled of jet fuel and recycled air. Outside, through the oval window, she caught a glimpse of wings lined in silver floodlight. Raptors, F-22s waiting like silent predators at the far edge of the tarmac. Nobody in this cabin knew she had flown with them, led them. The aisle grew crowded as last-minute passengers boarded. A flight attendant maneuvered down, her uniform crisp, smile professional, though her eyes lingered a moment too long on the woman in 12F. "Sir, ma'am?" She nodded to the row, but the faint hesitation in her glance told its own story. This passenger didn't look like the others. Too plain, too still. She pulled her hoodie tighter, sinking further into the seat. From the rear of the cabin, a laugh rang out, one of those loud, careless bursts designed to be overheard. A group of contractors in polo shirts and lanyards had clustered together, trading stories about bases, deployments, politics. One of them spotted her, raised his voice a notch. "Bet she's here on discount. They'll put anyone on these flights now." The others chuckled. She kept her gaze on the seatback in front of her, fingers resting lightly on her knee, still and controlled. The engines rumbled faintly under the floorboards as ground crew prepped for pushback. Passengers shuffled, buckles, clicked. The man across the aisle leaned toward her again, his tone half condescending, half curious. "You look nervous. First long haul?" Her eyes flicked up. Calm, steady, but unflinching. "No." Just that one word. He blinked, thrown off by the clarity in her tone, then leaned back into his seat, muttering something under his breath. At the front of the cabin, the PA crackled to life, but not the smooth voice of the attendant. A different tone, firm, clipped, military, passenger in seat 12F. Every head turned, conversations halted mid-word. The cabin fell into a hush so complete, the hum of the ventilation filled the silence. She straightened, hoodie shadowing her face, the voice again, louder this time, carrying authority. "Call sign. Midnight Viper. Stand." The words dropped like a stone into still water. Ripples of shock spread row by row. People craned their necks, staring. Whispers shot through the air. Did he just say, "Midnight Viper"? The aisle cleared, almost by instinct. From the forward rows, a group of men in flight uniforms rose to their feet. F-22 pilots, every one of them. Their boots struck the floor in unison as they turned sharply to face her row. And then, as if choreographed, their right hands snapped to their brows. Salutes, crisp and precise, gasps echoed across the cabin. The businessman's smirk vanished, lips parting in disbelief. The young woman who'd whispered earlier sank back into her seat, color draining from her face. Even the contractors fell silent, eyes wide, lanyards forgotten in their hands. She rose slowly, steady as a blade unsheathed. Pulled her hood back. The overhead light caught the edge of a silver pin on her cap, an eagle gleaming in the dim glow. Her duffel patch flashed just long enough for anyone watching to read the stitched words, Midnight Viper. For a heartbeat, nobody breathed, and in that silence, the hierarchy of the cabin shattered. The salute didn't last more than a few seconds, but it was enough to redraw the room. When the pilots lowered their hands, the cabin seemed to breathe again, air rushing back like pressure equalizing after a dive. But not everyone understood what they had just seen. The businessman across the aisle leaned forward, brows furrowed. "What was that about?" he asked, trying to laugh it off. His voice carried, brittle at the edges. "Some kind of inside joke?" Nobody answered. The pilots sat back down, their faces set in that stone-still discipline that civilians never quite understood. For them, the moment had been more than ceremony. It had been respect, recognition. The businessman huffed, straightened his tie, and muttered, "Ridiculous." The attendant returned, pushing the cart slowly down the aisle. She paused by 12F, eyes flicking between the woman in the hoodie and the men who had just saluted her. Something in her expression shifted, confusion, maybe awe, but she smoothed it quickly into a polite smile. "Would you like something to drink?" "Water," came the quiet reply. The attendant nodded, set the plastic cup down, and moved on. But the whispering had already started. A couple in row 13 bent their heads together, the woman's earrings catching the light as she whispered, "Midnight Viper. I've heard that name before." Her partner shook his head, brows knitting. "Probably nothing, just theatrics." The contractors in polo shirts weren't so cautious. One leaned over the back of his seat, smirk painted across his face. "Nice show back there," he said, his voice just loud enough to draw attention. "Didn't know economy was serving celebrities now." His friends chuckled. Another chimed in. "Call sign, please. Anybody can make one up. I could be Thunderbolt if I wanted." They laughed louder this time, high-fiving over the armrest. She didn't react. She sipped her water slowly, fingers steady on the thin plastic. 3. Businessman across the aisle couldn't help himself. "Look, sweetheart," he said, voice oily now, like he was reclaiming ground. "These guys," he gestured vaguely at the pilots, "they're probably being polite, military courtesy or whatever. Doesn't mean you're anything special." The words landed flat, but the passengers nearby leaned in anyway, waiting, to see how she'd respond. She didn't. She set the cup down on the tray table, the water inside barely rippling. The silence made him shift uncomfortably, tugging at his collar. It wasn't the first time she'd been underestimated. She knew the rhythm well. Strangers assuming, strangers mocking, strangers filling the air with noise because they didn't know what silence could do. The hum of the engines deepened as the aircraft rolled toward the runway. Out the window, the F-22s came into view again, their silhouettes sharp against the sodium lights. Raptors lined for escort duty. The contractors craned their necks, one of them whistling. "Now that's something," he muttered. "Imagine flying those." Another snorted. "As if anyone here could." She fastened her belt, thumb brushing the buckle once more, the motion deliberate. The flight attendant's voice crackled overhead, announcing takeoff, safety reminders lost under the low rumble of turbines spooling to full power. The cabin lights dimmed further, plunging the rows into soft shadow. The aircraft surged forward, weight pressing passengers into their seats, drinks trembling on tray tables. The contractors whooped like it was a roller coaster. The businessman shut his eyes tight. muttering something about turbulence. She sat motionless, eyes closed, body loose against the surge. Every fiber of her being had known this feeling for years: acceleration, climb, engines straining against gravity. It was almost familiar enough to be comforting. At 10,000 feet, the seatbelt sign pinged off. People stirred, stretching, rustling through bags. The chatter picked up again, sharper this time. The young woman from the row ahead turned halfway in her seat, phone raised as if pretending to scroll. Her camera was angled just right. The faint click of a shutter confirmed it. Her companion leaned in, whispering, "You'll post it later, right? #MysterySoldier." The woman in 12F didn't flinch. She turned her gaze toward the oval window, watching the clouds glow faintly under the moonlight. From behind, another voice joined. The chorus. A hedge fund type, suit jacket hanging on the hook, loosened tie, expensive watch flashing under the cabin lights. He leaned over the aisle, grinned sharp. "Tell me, miss, do you actually fly or do you just let these boys salute you for fun?" Ripple of chuckles followed. Her hand tightened just slightly on the armrest. No one noticed but the pilot 2 rows up, who sat straighter, jaw clenched. She answered calmly, voice so quiet they almost missed it. Looks can be deceiving. It wasn't loud. It wasn't defiant. But the words cut through the laughter like a blade through silk. For a moment, even the chuckles died. The hedge fund man blinked, caught off guard, then forced a laugh, shaking his head. Cute. The contractors picked up the thread again, filling the silence. But the balance had shifted. People were watching. Her more carefully now. The flight continued upward, steady climb through dark skies. The hum of the engines turned constant, hypnotic. Attendants served meals, trays rattling. Passengers murmured, some asleep, some whispering behind raised hands. But every few minutes, someone glanced at 12F. Whispers trailed like contrails in the thin air. Who is she really? She kept still, ate nothing, drank little, her movements precise, controlled. Even the smallest gesture, adjusting her sleeve, setting her cup down, seemed deliberate, as if she was trained never to waste motion. The businessman across the aisle shook his head, still muttering to himself. All an act. Has to be. But he avoided meeting her eyes now. The contractors had grown quieter, too. Their jokes had thinned into nervous chuckles. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tide of the cabin began to shift. Because no matter how much they tried to laugh, they couldn't shake the image burned into their minds. A squadron of elite pilots standing at attention, saluting a woman they didn't even know by name, but by call sign. And seat 12F was still sitting there, silent as the sky outside, waiting. The cabin settled into that uneasy quiet that comes after too much noise. People whispered, laughed softly, then stopped, like they were waiting for something else to happen. It didn't take long. A sharp movement broke the monotony, boots clicking against the floor. One of the F-22 pilots rose from his seat near the front. He moved down the aisle with the precision of someone still inside a mission brief. His uniform was immaculate, rank insignia gleaming under the overhead lights. Passengers leaned back as he passed, whispers rippling like wind through tall grass. Where's he going? Why's he standing up? He stopped at row 12. The pilot stood at attention, spine straight, voice carrying like it had been trained to command cockpits at Mach speed. "Ma'am," he said, the single word clipped and unmistakably formal. "Permission to greet you properly." The businessman across the aisle blinked. "What?" he muttered, too loudly. The woman in 12F didn't move for a long moment. Her hood still shadowed part of her face. She exhaled once, slowly, then pushed the fabric back. The cabin light caught her features now, calm, unreadable, carved in that quiet steel that only combat teaches. The pilot saluted, sharp, perfect. His voice dropped, lower now, but clear enough for half the cabin to hear. Are you Shadowhawk 12? Gasps fluttered down the rows like a sudden draft of cold air. She didn't answer immediately. She just looked at him, steady, unflinching. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. The effect was instant. The pilot snapped his hand down, then turned to face the rest of the F-22 crew. Attention! Seats creaked as uniforms shifted. Every pilot on board stood at once, boots striking the floor like a drumbeat. The sound rolled down the aisle in a perfect rhythm until the entire squadron faced row 12, and then 20 salutes, raised in unison. The cabin exploded into whispers. Someone dropped their plastic cup. A child asked their mother what was happening. The businessman's face drained pale, his earlier smugness collapsing into something closer to fear. The contractors froze mid-laugh, eyes darting nervously between one another. The hedge fund man muttered, "No way," under his breath. His watch hand trembled slightly on the armrest. The woman with the phone lowered it slowly, realizing this was no staged stunt. For a full 10 seconds, the salutes held. No one else moved. Even the engines seemed quieter, their steady drone fading against the silence inside the cabin. When the squadron dropped their hands, the pilot who had approached her inclined his head. "My apologies, ma'am," he said formally. "It won't happen again." She gave a single nod, nothing more. Her expression hadn't shifted, but her eyes carried the weight of years. Training, combat, decisions made above the clouds where mistakes meant fire. The pilot turned, marched back to his seat, and the squadron followed his cue, folding back into their rows with the same discipline as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. The passengers sat stunned. A couple exchanged glances, trying to reconcile the plain hoodie with the authority that had just silenced the most elite fighter pilots in the world. The businessman tried to laugh again, but the sound caught in his throat, thin and unconvincing. He turned to the window, jaw clenched, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. The contractors whispered frantically, but their words were stripped of confidence. "Shadowhawk? I've heard—" one started, but his friend shushed him. Quickly. The hedge fund man stared at her openly now, curiosity replacing mockery. She leaned back against her seat, eyes closing as if none of it mattered, like she hadn't just shifted the axis of the room with a single nod. The attendant appeared again, voice softer than before. "Ma'am, can I get you anything else?" "Just water," she said quietly. The attendant nodded quickly, almost, like she was afraid to linger. Silence wrapped the cabin again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This one held weight, like storm clouds pressing against the skin. For the first time since boarding, nobody dared whisper about her. They were all waiting to see what else was true about the woman in seat 12F. The silence that followed the salute pressed against the cabin walls like extra weight. People shifted in their seats, unsure where to look, what to say. For a few minutes, only the low drone of the engines filled the air. But disbelief is stubborn. The businessman cleared his throat, desperate to reclaim the confidence he'd lost. "All very dramatic," he muttered loudly, though his voice wavered. "Probably just some ceremonial thing. Doesn't mean anything." He forced a laugh. It died quickly in the quiet. The contractors seized on his words. "Yeah, exactly," one of them said, leaning back, smirk sliding nervously across his face. "Anybody can salute anyone. Doesn't mean she's who they think she is." "Shadowhawk," another scoffed, shaking his head. "Sounds like a video game handle, not real life." Their chuckles rang false, brittle. But it was enough to make a few heads turn, passengers searching for certainty. The woman in 12F didn't move. Her gaze stayed fixed out the oval window where the night sky stretched endless, stars sharp against black. For a moment, she seemed carved from stillness itself. Then a sound cut through the cabin, sharper, alien to civilian ears. A burst of static, followed by a clipped voice. Raptor 1 to Midnight Viper. Visual confirmed. Do you copy? The contractors froze. The businessman's mouth fell open. The voice had come from the intercom. Not the cabin PA, but the cockpit. Relay. The flight crew hadn't muted their channel fast enough. Static hissed again. Midnight Viper, say the word. Formation ready on your mark. Gasps rippled like a shockwave. Passengers craned toward the windows, faces pressed to the glass. And there they were. Sleek silhouettes sliding alongside, wings level in perfect escort. Raptors. F-22s, their lights blinking in silent formation against the moonlit clouds. Holy, one of the contractors whispered, his voice breaking. Another scrambled to snap a picture, his hands trembling so badly the phone almost slipped. The hedge fund man leaned forward, disbelief bleeding into awe. They're waiting on her order? His voice cracked on the last word. The intercom hissed once more. Viper, acknowledge. Every head turned to 12F. The businessman shook his head violently, muttering, This is insane. Some mistake. Has to be. She reached calmly into the duffel at her feet. The zipper rasped, sharp in the hushed cabin. When her hand emerged, it held a helmet, matte black, visor reflecting the dim overhead lights. Along the side, embroidered clean in white stitching, Midnight Viper. The hedge fund man exhaled sharply, almost a laugh, but it came out strangled. The contractors said nothing. The businessman's face went chalk white. She set the helmet gently. On her lap, fingertips brushing the visor once, almost reverent. Then she leaned slightly toward the attendant, voice steady but quiet. Tell the cockpit, she said. Viper copies. The attendant didn't hesitate. She turned sharply, heels striking the aisle as she hurried forward, her posture transformed. Moments. Later, the intercom clicked again. Cockpit voice taut with something between respect and awe. Acknowledged. Raptors holding Viper formation. Outside, through the windows, the F-22s shifted seamlessly, tightening into a diamond shape around the aircraft. Perfect escort. Perfect protection. The cabin erupted, not in laughter, but in gasps, murmurs, awestruck whispers. Phones rose shakily to record, though most people were too stunned to frame a shot. The businessman sagged back into his seat, eyes darting everywhere but toward her. Sweat gathered at his temple. The contractors sat frozen, mouths half open, their earlier smirks wiped clean. One muttered a curse under his breath, too soft to carry. The hedge fund man simply stared at her, unable to hide the reverence in his eyes now. She lifted her water again, sipped once, then set it back down. Unmoved, calm, as if this entire display were routine. The contrast was unbearable to watch. Passengers in the rows nearby leaned toward one another, whispering fragments. She commands them. That's her squadron. She's real. A child across the aisle tugged his mother's sleeve, whispering loudly, Mom, is she a superhero? The mother only hushed him softly, eyes never leaving 12F. The cabin's energy shifted, fear replaced by awe, mockery by silence, judgment by respect. The first to break was one of the contractors. He leaned forward, voice hoarse. I didn't mean... He stopped himself, words crumbling. The businessman tried to speak, then thought better of it. His lips pressed into a thin line. He faced the window instead, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. The hedge fund man straightened, slowly, swallowed hard, then said carefully, It's an honor, ma'am. Her gaze slid to him, cool, unreadable, then away again, like the ocean refusing to hold a single drop. No thanks. No acknowledgement. Just silence. And that silence was louder than any response could have been. Outside, the Raptors held formation, unwavering, their presence undeniable. Every second they flew, there was proof proof that the woman in seat 12F wasn't a mystery or a rumor or a passenger to mock. She was command. She was legend, and for the first time since takeoff, every single person in the cabin knew it. The Raptors stayed outside, wings steady, until the cabin lights dimmed further for the overnight stretch. Their silhouettes cut against the moonlight, a constant reminder of who they were really escorting. For most passengers, it was impossible to look away. Inside, though, the mood had shifted. The businessman who had mocked her earlier sat rigid in his seat, eyes fixed on the floor. His earlier smugness had drained away, leaving only silence. When the attendant passed with the meal service, he waved her off with a shaky hand, avoiding even a glance toward 12F. The contractors, once loud, now whispered only to themselves. One of them muttered something about deleting a half-written post on his phone. Another stared out the window, jaw tight, face pale. Their earlier bravado had evaporated completely. The hedge fund man finally leaned forward, voice soft, almost respectful. "If I spoke out of turn earlier, I apologize." She didn't answer. She didn't even look at him. Instead, she adjusted. Her hoodie pulled it tighter around her shoulders and closed her eyes as if the apology wasn't for her to accept. The rest of the cabin noticed. Respect in silence meant more than words. Hours passed in that stillness. The hum of engines lulled some passengers to sleep, but many kept stealing glances toward 12F, as if afraid to miss another moment. Whispers carried softly. "She's real. That was her squadron. She doesn't need to prove anything." And then when the night seemed to settle, the most human detail emerged. From the pocket of her hoodie, she pulled out a small, worn photo. The edges were frayed, the colors faded from years of being carried. In the dim light, a few nearby passengers saw it. A picture of her and an older man in uniform, both smiling beneath the wing of a jet. His hand rested on her shoulder, pride written across his face. She looked at it for a long moment, thumb brushing the edge. Then she slid it back into her pocket, her expression unchanged, her movements steady. But the passengers who had seen it exchanged quiet glances. They understood. This wasn't about glory. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about honoring someone she still carried with her at 30,000 feet. When dawn broke over the horizon, the cabin stirred awake. The first rays of sunlight poured through the oval windows, washing the rows in gold. Outside, the F-22s peeled away one by one, banking gracefully into the morning sky. A few passengers gasped softly as they vanished into the light, as if watching. Guardians slipped back into legend. The attendant came by once more, her voice careful, almost deferential. "We'll be landing shortly," she said. Her eyes flicked to 12F, then away again, like even eye contact carried weight now. As the aircraft descended, the businessman finally spoke, barely above a whisper. I didn't know who you were." She turned her head, eyes steady on him. No anger, no triumph, just silence that spoke louder than anything he could have expected. He looked away, ashamed, his shoulders slumping. The wheels touched down with a heavy jolt, engines roaring, flaps shuddering. The Raptors were gone, but their absence was as loud as their presence had been. Every passenger felt it, the weight of having witnessed something they could never explain fully to anyone else. When the cabin doors opened, people filed out slowly, almost reverently. Conversations were hushed, eyes downcast. No one rushed past her now. No one tried to brush her aside. The hedge fund man paused in the aisle, hesitated, then offered a stiff nod. "Safe travels, ma'am." His voice cracked on the last word. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The contractors avoided her completely, slipping off the plane like shadows. The businessman lingered, face pale. But when their eyes met, one final time, he lowered his head, a silent admission. And then she was alone again in the cabin, slipping her duffel over her shoulder, moving with the same calm precision she always had. On the tarmac outside, the sunrise lit the horizon. She paused for just a moment at the door, watching it. Her hoodie caught the light, her silhouette framed against the orange sky. Then she stepped down, boots striking the ground steady, unhurried. The respect lingered behind her in the cabin. You know that feeling, don't you? When people look at you and see only the seat number, the hoodie, the surface, when they think you're less than you are. But the truth, it waits. It doesn't need to shout. It just reveals itself one moment, undeniable. And when it does, the world has no choice but to stand at attention. So tell me, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments.